everyone. Welcome to Bizdom, Season 2. As you're aware, we've had the opportunity to have conversations with many accomplished business leaders, and today there is someone who's as accomplished as some of the others have had the opportunity to interact with. So Mr. Giridhar Sanjeevi, a seasoned business leader who spent decades in corporate India. His last stint was as the CFO of Indian Hotels, the Taj Group, the Taj brand, and he's also had leadership positions in Aditya Birla, in Merck, and in Wockhardt. So without much ado, I would like to welcome Mr. Giridhar Sanjeevi to the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Just call me Giri. I think you said spiritual.
Yeah.
I think thanks for that lovely introduction. But generally, my career has been, what I simply say, has been in cigarettes, booze, drugs, and hospitality. I sold cigarettes in ITC, booze at Diageo, drugs at Merck, and then rounded it off in hospital.
And then you brought everyone to the hospital.
Exactly.
So that
hospitality.
You were with the hospital group as well, right? But maybe you did pharma there. I mean, you were not with Wockhardt hospitals, but with pharma. So you sold medicines after giving them drugs.
Yes.
Right. So. But jumping in, right? I think what really struck me when I interacted with you, and also when I looked up, when I did some research about you, is the fact that maybe you worked with a lot of these Indian multinationals, as they call it, but your career kind of spanned across continents, right? So you worked in Asia, in Europe. So tell me about this whole cultural assimilation, and also more importantly, you've been in this whole leadership, you've seen leadership evolving over a period of time. So how has leadership evolved over the years, and how was it when you started? How is it now? If you can throw some light.
No, thank you. I think I'm very fortunate to have kind of got the breadth of industries as well as the geographical exposure, and I think really grateful for that. And you're right that over the years, I've seen clearly a morphing of leadership across. Actually, I think today, I think there are pluses and minuses also. I think on the plus side, I think today is becoming a lot more opportunities opening up for people, and people can be much more risk taking. People can be more enterprising, ability to create. I think all this is great actually, and in a country like India, I see that very much. I mean, some parts of the world like Europe are still pretty much in the olden world actually. But if you look at India, this is something very good actually. And I call it loosely a hustle culture actually. Hustle culture where I think the focus is on growth and getting it done. And then the processes and the systems and culture and all follows actually. So I suppose there is a plus and a minus in that actually. I think the concern sometimes I have is that are we building long-lasting corporations actually? And we have seen how the Fortune 500 thing has churned, and even companies which have grown can suddenly come down actually. And what that means in terms of individual leadership development is that time spans are much shorter actually. Which means if when I joined ITC or when you work for companies like Merck or Taj actually, people put 30 years plus in their companies actually. So there's a very structured career. There's somebody who kind of takes you through, you get promoted, you do different roles, you put through leadership development programs actually. But now I think even these companies are realizing that people don't stay for long. And therefore I think both from a company perspective in terms of leadership development, as well as individuals in terms of how they look at their own leadership, it's all becoming on the job, on the go actually, as opposed to something very structured. And I think that can again be a plus and a minus actually. Because you learn very fast because you have to hit the road running. I think earlier on you could be a trainee and you go through a long internship and then you get put through the paces. But now I think you go, and I think today people are much smarter also. I certainly think that people are much smarter. So I guess like in any world there's a plus and a minus. But I would err on the side of optimism to sort of say that the opportunities which are today there are much greater and more global. More global, and therefore as long as people are open to those opportunities and have a growth mindset, I'm not even saying geographical, but growth mindset, I think that is probably becoming important. Growth mindset, grit, I think when you see startups as an example, people really trying to solve some significant problems, but going through significant challenges as well. I think growth mindset, grit, I think some of those are becoming very important leadership principles. And even for older people who are, say, in the mid-40s, working in a certain organization as an example, I think what has worked for you so far is not necessarily going to work for you in the future. So you need to reskill and rebuild actually. And people who will thrive are people who recognize the need to develop and adapt and thrive actually. I think these are some headline thoughts.
Right. You spoke about two things, and I want to bring out both those aspects. One, you said you spoke about the hustle culture.
Yeah.
And you said typically in a hustle culture, you figure out how to make money, right, or how to build traction, and then the process and everything else kind of follows, right? Is that very Indian in the way you think? Because I think if you typically compare a multinational versus how an Indian mindset is, the process is always the last thing that you do, because I think as a culture, I don't think we follow rules that well, or we are more chaotic. I mean, even with a traffic signal, you need a cop, right, to kind of control us. So is that a positive that you see, this whole hustle culture and then the process following, or you see that to be? And you also spoke about the Fortune 500. A lot of these companies are very structured, well oiled, and they got to build scale because there was some method to the madness. So what's your take on this?
I think if I see in general, it's not just an India phenomenon. I think in general in the startup world in Asia, you will see a lot of the hustle culture in operation. The US is a great market for startups, and I think startups willy-nilly are focused on solving for the here and now rather than process. But I suppose as they become bigger, then I think some of those processes set in because you can't operate without them. That's one part of it. The second part of it is that even in established corporations, I go back to my days in Diageo. In Diageo, I think those days, what used to happen was we were focused on the premium brands actually, and we had divided. So two things we had done: one, focused on premium brands, and second, we had focused on the big markets which matter. I think therefore we had divided the world into major markets like US and UK, and we had venture markets which were the 120 countries which are like India and other places. And one thing we found, and I go back again 15 years ago, I'm talking 15 steps, maybe nearly 20 years ago, I think we found distinct cultural changes in the way these markets operated. If you had to get a decision out of a US market as an example, it would take 4 months, it would be with a lot of research basis, and then of course they would do it. Whereas in the venture markets like India, it was always going after the low-hanging fruit, always getting things, keep things moving actually. It is a pay-as-you-go kind of culture actually. And we found value there. In fact, what happened was that as the world got divided, Ivan Menezes used to run the venture markets, and there were other people running, say, US as an example. And he found Diageo itself became a place where there were two kinds of cultures operating. And ultimately what we decided is that when growth started to struggle, and every company goes through those challenges of growth struggles actually, that is when the company came back and said, gosh, why are we being so slow in terms of taking decisions in, say, a market like the US? Why can't we learn from
the more agile
markets? In fact, Ivan then went on to become the CEO of US before he became the global CEO. I think, and some of those principles came into play actually. So I think there is a merit in terms of the bigger market mindset where stability, processes come into play. And there is also merit in the venture mindset, which is all about let's get things going actually. And as a CFO, I think this is a typical challenge, even whichever corporation you are. I think one typical thing that I always find is it pace before rigor, or is it rigor before pace, or is it pace with rigor actually? And in my role,
that's a very important thing, right, to think about. Yeah,
exactly. And I think when you talk of pace before rigor means that something could fall apart. But in a hustle culture, you may say chalega actually. Experimentation culture. As long as you know that the bets you're taking are okay, then I think it's okay. And today you have concepts like A/B testing, where if you debate as we do it this way or this way, people are willing to say let's try both.
Correct.
And then go forward actually. So I think as long as you can define the limits of it, I think it's okay to do that. But as a CFO, if I say rigor before pace, that would always cause a problem, saying that Giri, let's get things moving and then we'll worry about what has to happen. So ultimately, I think you need to build systems which are paced with rigor and make sure that you enable a culture of experimentation.
But how do you do that? This is fascinating, right, Giri? The fact that you said that you have to build rigor with pace. And that's not always easy because it's like fixing a car which is in motion.
Correct.
Okay, because if you make clear choices, then you know that you can stop the car or you can go faster. Correct. And don't worry about the nuts and bolts coming off. Correct. But here I think you're talking about both. So how do you kind of do this?
So I think we are all ultimately, whichever function we work in. I think my own belief is that we are not just scorekeepers, but we are also people who hit the goals. Actually, I think that's the function. All of us need to believe that we have to also help in getting the goals done, as opposed to just keeping the score. Which means a key role that all of us have, whichever function, and as CFOs actually, in particular as an example, I think we have to enable risk taking actually. One method I've typically found is that if some investment is required, I've always said that, okay, let's do it, but let's define milestones. Let's define milestones where you say, okay, you want $1 million, take $250,000 today. But let's define at the end of 3 months or 6 months, whatever is the right period, what are the milestones that we kind of are hoping to achieve. And if that milestone is kind of done, then I think you invest more. I think the gating process I've always found pretty useful actually. And that's the way you have to enable, because you have to enable the risk at the same time. You are also the steward to make sure that things don't kind of go blow up. So you need to find the balance, and ultimately you need to build alignment there.
It's more about testing, right? It's about testing, figuring out whether it kind of works. It's like testing a nuclear bomb within a protected site, right? But make sure that there is no collateral damage being done to the populations which reside nearby. Yeah, I mean, with that's a good thought, right?
But I also want to ask you, how do you see? Because you have been consulting with companies. I think two things we have spoken about. One is where do you see leadership evolving, and you see multiple clients. And also, how do companies manage processes versus growth? Actually?
So, I think, as you said rightly, right? I think different countries probably manage these processes vis-a-vis the growth parameters very, very differently. I think if you typically look at companies that operate in India, operated by Indians, and see, at the end of the day, processes there could be an ideology at the top or a philosophy at the top that we need to be a process-oriented company, but the processes are managed by people on the ground. So somewhere, as I said, I think there is this tendency, and we are getting better at it, that in India it's hard for people to follow any system. Okay, it takes a lot of time, but when we get it right, we get it right. But it's very, very hard. I mean, they say, right, that change is glorious at the end, but it's painful at the beginning. So we see that it is fairly hard for you to institute a process, but when it starts working, it works. Whereas I think in most developed markets, I think process comes first, and there are pluses and minuses, as you said. They are so process oriented that if something does not work, then they don't know what to do. Imagine I was at the New York airport a week back, and their system was not working when I went and gave my travel documents. And for 15 minutes, tell me I'm not exaggerating, they didn't know what to do. Okay, imagine that happening in India. We would work without the process. We would find out a way to make that system work and get the next passenger, but the next passenger kept waiting behind me. Okay, so these are, I think, the pluses and minuses. The pluses, they are not going to deviate. Correct. Okay, so you know that they will wait until it gets fixed, or they find a via media. In our case, we'll first find the via media, right? We want to make it work. Okay, so that typically kind of separates. On the leadership bit, I find that today, I think if you have to be successful, if you really want to be aligned to the global mindset, I think today, in my view, there is no real difference between an Indian leader and a global leader. I think they all pretty much behave universally the same. Correct. They talk the same language. They all operate on the principles of trust and integrity and those kind of things. Those have become now hygiene. So that, I think, has been a remarkable shift, at least in the last 10 years, I would say, not even the last 30 years. I think the last 10 years, that's been a remarkable shift.
True. No, I think so. And I think there's one more aspect which I've always found in my global travels, like global working. I think beyond the process, it's also the culture. Like, when I was in London, the Anglo-Saxon culture let's say we're all sitting together and we're agreeing, discussing a plan, and I say I'll do this, and you say you'll do this, and you say you'll do this, and to be done by a particular date. Generally, it'll get done. And if you're not able to do it by the date, you will get a message from you saying that I may need 3-4 more days. I think when I looked at markets like Indonesia or China or Ireland or Poland, even within Europe, I think people can agree to things and just not do.
Talk to me a little bit about teams that you have managed.
Yeah.
Right. I think again, one is the cultural aspect that you spoke. Right. Second is the leadership. But in general, has managing teams undergone a change from the time you started to today? And if yes, then what has changed? And what are the things that have not changed at all?
Yeah. No, I think we have moved from a hierarchical kind of organizations into more looser organizations. Hierarchical to matrix to sometimes pretty much loose actually. And that has a different mindset. For instance, in a hierarchical organization, the boss is right. In fact, I think the conversation many times is that do you work for the cause or do you work for the boss? And there are organizations which work on that basis, where they will do exactly what the boss says. And that works for certain companies. And that works for certain companies. And then the pressure is on the boss to make sure he takes the right decisions. And that also means that it sometimes stifles, initiatives by the level below, because he's waiting for the boss to say what has to be done. Then we moved to matrix structures where I think people were saying, okay, I'm part of a team, I'm part of a work group where there are people from different teams, and then you work as a group. You collaborate and you go. I think the challenge goes from a directing to influencing actually. I think the general movement I find is that moving from directing to influencing is the new theme. And as technology, as working from home, looser groups and all of those are now becoming much more of the norm. I think it's more about influence today actually.
And how do you fit in AI? I mean, people are saying that you don't need too many people interfering with what you do, right? Yeah, no, AI I think is evolving. My sense is that clearly processes can very easily be kind of taken care of by AI. And if you have agentic AI now, agentic AI can do lots of different things actually. To some extent, it's a wait and watch in terms of where all the implications come in. And clearly at one level, lots of jobs are at risk actually. I mean, which means that things that if you're a risk manager in a bank as an example, I know JP Morgan has implemented a software spending billions of dollars, which can write risk reports for all their proposals actually, which is pretty much accurate. Then you just need an oversight to make sure that all factors are taken care of. So many jobs will definitely be at risk. And sometimes we tend to think that creative jobs perhaps are not, but I think creative jobs can also be actually, because the system is capable of kind of doing some really creative work actually. So hence I think it's a very big change. But like every change, I think while there will be loss of jobs, I also think that there will be new opportunities, new kind of roles possible actually, and only time will tell. But it has implications for countries. I think, like today, what's happening to the IT companies? IT companies have been following a certain model, and today you see some plateauing happening there. So they need to reinvent themselves. In terms of our own education, our own children, in terms of what kind of roles they need to do, I think it has implications, I suppose, in terms of your ability to be flexible and doing different things actually. I think, so there are big implications. But AI is still playing out is what I would say actually. And some of the ethical issues around AI, that's a big subject by itself, but that we'll see how it evolves. But do you see the need to manage people differently with AI being almost like a co-pilot? And what changes do you see there? I think first of all, you may not need a lot of the teams. What I'm trying to say is that if you may not need so many people. So which means that you are probably focused in terms of using AI to give you a certain outcome, and then you probably use your team to understand the outcome, explainability, and how you implement and all of those actually, because those are becoming important. Explainability is becoming a very important thing. If you allow AI to, in fact, I was talking to somebody the other day who do some high-tech work in programming, and she was telling me, Giri, this team member kind of used ChatGPT to do a complex programming, and which is fine. But when that program began to give problems, this guy didn't know which part of the program to fix was actually because he didn't do it. Yeah. He didn't do it, and so therefore I think the question is, what does it mean in terms of oversight on teams?
what does it mean, so working with teams in terms of making sure that they don't do these kind of usage, because ultimately it impacts the organization actually. So I think some of those will, I suppose, play out, but we'll have to see. Yeah.
One of your philosophies also has been do good, do well, right? From that standpoint, I mean, you said this in the context of ESG, I think, right? But does it have even a CSR or a social angle to it? And if yes, would you like to explain that a little bit?
Not just social angle. I think the way of, I think ultimately business
profits with a purpose.
Exactly.
Right?
Profits with purpose is absolutely important.
Yeah.
I think gone are the days where just shareholder capitalism, wealth maximization, that is gone completely. I think for me, the Tata Group the last 7 years was a great example where I think everything had a heart to it, everything has a purpose to it. When Jamshedji Tata said that community is the real basis for which we exist, all actions are motivated by that. Like during the pandemic, as an example, I think when the pandemic hit, the first discussion that my boss Puneet and I had with Chandra, and he told both of us, guys, make sure that you do not fire anybody. While companies are firing because of zero revenues, and to mitigate losses, people lost jobs.
In your case, the revenues had almost come down
exactly
to
zero. But the first message was, he looked at me, Chandra looked at me and said, Giri will anyway make some 1,000 crore losses. What is another 50-60 crores to make sure people are protected actually? And that is, and not just that, we went beyond that also. Like for instance, while we were not firing, some of our partner hotels were firing their lowest level employees actually.
No, we used to work for a hospitality brand. I don't want to name them. Right. At that point in time, they were making a lot of acquisitions. And the day the Prime Minister came on TV and announced the pandemic, our mandate stopped. Okay, and that's not because I don't feel bad about that, but they fired a lot of their people. Correct.
That's true.
At that point in time.
But one example I do want to say is that because we found that the lower level people in partner companies have been fired, we had all taken salary cuts, and normally salary cuts are taken because you want to save cash. We contributed that money to the Taj Trust, and the Taj Trust money was used to pay the people of our partner companies who had been fired. So they all got 50,000 rupees actually. I think that is unbelievable actually. Yeah. I think so that is value in ethos, and I think the point is that you can still make profit is not inconsistent. Profit objective is not inconsistent with purpose. I think goodness always wins actually. So my view is that profits and purpose go together actually. And there are so many examples. I can talk about an example in Merck, where patient is at the center of everything. In fact, George W. Merck said that you should always remember that medicine is for people and not for profits. And if you have remembered, profits will follow. And today it's a $235 billion market cap company. But yet the patient centricity is so much. And some of the work we used to do in terms of enabling patients and enabling research, I think was just amazing actually. So hence I think profits and purpose completely coexist actually.
And also talk to us about maybe an incident during the course of your career where you said that doing this good and something came in the way, right? And you were between a rock and a hard place. Whether I should be doing good or whether I should be looking at profits. Okay, and you kind of made a decision one way or the other.
I think there is no compromise at all. In fact, I think if you believe that you need to do the right things, there's no compromise. I still remember July 1, 2002. We fired the entire leadership team in Indonesia for anti-corruption actually, when I was in Diageo, complete team. And we spent a few months in terms of thinking through how do we fix the culture in terms of anti-corruption and bribery. We held detailed workshops, we met regulators, we met lawyers actually. And ultimately we morphed the business model completely. What we said was that we can't run it, and the risks were too much in terms of running the business in that country. So we redefined our role in just being the brand custodians, and on an arm's length principle, the business itself got transferred actually, and with full protection so that it is not seen as, outsource, you can't even outsource processes to somebody because you can't do it and therefore somebody else will do it. We had to take care of that. But then we had to morph the And then of course the business kind of took off, and with full compliance. I think you need systems and processes to weed that out completely. Actually, there's no question of forgiving it. Actually,
no compromise.
No compromise. You can't compromise. You just need to take the person out. You need to send a strong message, understand why it happened, and make sure processes are implemented. So I think that is what I would say. I think it's nothing is tamper proof. People say tamper proof. It's tamper evident. Ultimately, what you're looking for is tamper evident kind of behavior. Kind of systems, where if something goes wrong, something has gone wrong, and you have processes, and more important than processes, I would say good communication. Because I think one of the things about good cultures and governance is also great communication, where upward, sideward, downward communication is great. Which means if somebody comes and tells you, and usually it's the lowest guy in the company who comes and tells you something doesn't seem right, and usually we tend to not listen to the lowest level guy because he's too junior. But if you listen to him and understand what's happening and are able to fix it, then I think you're fine actually. And even regulators are happy with that. In fact, when I was in Merck, I think we used to regularly interact with regulators actually, regularly. And I can give you an example in Merck, which is an outstanding example of best practice. I just joined Merck in India, and we got a notice from CBI saying that you have paid some doctors, can you confirm? So we looked at our systems and said, yes, we have paid. We have paid, and we paid on this date, and we paid say 25, 30, 40,000, whatever is amount. And those doctors were under investigation by CBI in Gujarat actually. And I was a CFO and a board member, so therefore the CBI guy said, come and see me now. Come and see me, and he gave me a date to come. So obviously it was CBI, it was investigation. So we went fully prepared. We appointed lawyers to support us in case. And that's the only time I have actually had to face a regulator like this, because you keep your phones at the reception, you can't take it up. And a lawyer came with me, and the CBI guy was very upset, saying that how can you bring a lawyer? Only if I arrest you, the lawyer can come. That was how the conversation began. Door is shut, you can't go out. And then he started questioning me on what exactly happened. And basically, in the medical parlance, all of us, when we fall ill, we go to our doctor. Now, how do you know the doctor is fully updated with the latest thing? So medical pharma companies do something called continuing medical education meetings, where experts come and talk to doctors in terms of upgrading them, in terms of the latest, in terms of course of treatment and all of that. But many times these medical education meetings are all a farce actually, which means they are all opportunities for whining, dining, bribing and so on. And basically they were investigating that. So the first question was, can you please prove the meetings happened? And I said, yeah, here are the bills from the hotels actually. So he said, yes, I see the bills, but please show me that the meetings happened. So we said, here is a list of doctors who attended, and we had an attendance list taken actually. So he said, okay, you have given me an attendance list, and I see the names of those two doctors, but please prove to me that the meeting actually happened. So our process was photographic evidence for each of those meetings from two different angles taken actually. So we said, here are the photographs from that meeting actually. And then it went on and on. How do you pay these doctors? You have paid 50,000 rupees. And we said, we pay based on a scientific principle, saying that time to prepare the presentation, time to travel, time to spend time at the meeting, and therefore potential loss of clinical practice compensated at a certain per hour rate is equal to that 50,000. So we said, this is how we do it. We were the 12th or 13th company that he was investigating. And as this discussion progressed, what began as a very tough discussion, he fell off the chair actually. He said, I've not seen these processes. And then he said, okay, now you leave it with us. We will come back to you. And 2 months later, he called me, and I still have his number on my phone. He said, Giri, we have taken the company off the list.
Excellent.
And he said that, hum Bombay aate hain, chai piyenge. So what I'm trying to say is that I think it's purpose with profit, doing the right
transparency.
Things. Transparency, and it's not regulators driving processes. You determine that you want a process which works, and therefore, and this for me was great practice actually. And what we also did was, we used an example, because not only was I interrogated as part of the process, the medical representative who organized those meetings was also called, and his skin was saved because he had followed all the processes. He's followed all and we made it and sometimes, when you talk to sales teams saying that follow processes, they won't listen to you. They'll say, here is a CFO talking about processes. But here we made this guy talk about processes.
So he understood the value, right?
Understood the value. Otherwise his family would have been in trouble. So how do you drive through the line? I think its purpose and profit is not just some leadership team, executive team kind of statement. It has to be translated through the line. So I would say this is a great example of how a regulator saw best practice in what and potentially we became, and we got awards. I remember in Merck for what do you say, from the tax department for being some award, honest taxpayer. I mean, we got all those awards actually. But that is good governance actually. That's good governance.
No, in cricket parlance or an analogy, right? If you see, a wicket keeper is never recognized for the catches that he takes. He's hauled up only when he drops a catch.
Exactly.
So I think a good process, for example, never gives you the accolades.
Exactly.
Only when you screw up, you figure out that the process is wrong.
No, trust is like salt.
Yeah.
You feel the absence. Trust is like salt. I think as long as
Very
everything is going well,
everything
is fine. But the moment something goes wrong, I think that's when everything kind of blows up actually.
So from trust to sustainability, right? So again, that's a topic which is close to your heart, right? And ESG again, right? So talk to me a little bit about ESG, the work that you did for some of the companies that you worked for, and in general, I mean, what's...
Yeah, no, I think I've been looking at ESG quite closely in the last 4-5 years in my role at Indian Hotels, because I think ESG really kind of took off after the Larry Fink letter of 2017, 2017 or 18, where he talked about companies working for the long term. And as you know, he's a passive fund. He's not even an active investor. He's a passive fund actually. And then I started getting involved in it actually. And basically what it came down to in terms of ESG is that companies can have 3 stances on ESG. This is from a Harvard Law School article, very nice article, which I really relate to. At one level, companies can relate to ESG from a pure compliance perspective. The stance on ESG driven by compliance, which means the law says publish a BRSR report, I will do it. The law says you must not discharge effluent water into the river, I will do it. So a stance driven by compliance actually. Is it okay? I think it's okay, but not enough. But it will always be driven by compliance then actually. The next stance, which I think is very valuable, is stance driven by strategy actually, which means that if it makes strategic sense
it's a board agenda.
It's a board agenda, and also it can be well incorporated across the organization. I can remember when we implemented solar power arrangement with Tata Power in one of our Bombay hotels. It was a no-brainer at all, because not only was it green power, it was also significantly cheaper than the regular power actually. So going green,
and you are generating your own power, right?
No, Tata Power is giving us green power. But the point is, going green at the same time saving some 50% cost on the regular power was a no-brainer. Now, whether these arbitrages continue for the long term, I don't know. But the point is, every hotel wanted to implement actually. Now, so obviously now I think and embedding into strategy is not then becomes a board level agenda. Every hotel wants to do it. So I think embedding into strategy is far more sustainable because people see value through the line actually. And I think my own sense today is that we are still scratching the surface from a compliance perspective. Even on BRSR reports, I've seen at board levels, there is very little knowledge on what BRSR actually means. What are GHG emissions? How do you measure it? If there's a waste disposal, what happens? I think people just don't understand. And while you talk of consistency of accounting principles when you sort of write, a waste collection process in one unit could be very different from a waste collection process in another unit, including the process and the way it's recorded as an example. So consistency of process. So my own sense is that there's a lot more work needs to be done from a strategy perspective. And today I think, whether we like it or not, I think climate change is real, which means that companies are already dealing with adaptation costs. So there is at one level huge risks because of climate, but equally there are massive opportunities because of climate actually. So which means that if companies can relook at strategy and do the pivots that are required, and there are some fantastic examples of companies which are pivoting actually, then I think you can pay off. Of course there are trade-offs involved. Trade-offs are not easy. Like the former CEO of Danone did a lot of work on sustainability, and he got fired because the Danone was going slow. Unilever, for instance, recently has announced some modifications to the way on the scope of sustainability by the earlier CEO who just got fired, because I think people are kind of learning how to do it. But trade-offs are involved because you need to explain to shareholders that some of these may not give you instant results actually. Like one of the best examples is a company in, I think it's Denmark, called Ørsted, which pivoted to wind power from coal power, I think, about in early 2000. It recognized that coal power is not going to be sustainable. And they went to shareholders and said, we're shutting down perfectly good working plants and moving to wind power. And you need to wait for a few years in terms of returns. And it became the darling of stock markets. Now, of course, it's in trouble for other kinds of reasons because wind power is now becoming economically very difficult to sustain. But I think these strategic pivots are becoming very important. And hence, I think the second stance I'm very excited is about ESG on strategy. Even in my own work, I think what I'm trying to emphasize is that let's look for those strategic opportunities. And then the third one, of course, ESG as purpose, which is like Tata saying that we will not fire an employee during the pandemic as an example. So ESG as compliance, ESG as strategy, ESG as purpose. And my interest at this point of time is how do you go beyond compliance?
In fact, it's inverted, right? The point number 3 is on top and then the strategy.
It has to be driven by purpose. It has to be driven by purpose, ultimately, actually.
Right.
So hence, I think I think there's plenty of work to be done, actually. And I think transformations will happen.
So you think it's an economic model issue? For example, in a country like India, which is still developing, I think manufacturing is not a strength. There is a bigger push to say that, how do you balance growth with sustainability? Somewhere I think we talk about becoming carbon neutral, we talk about being more sustainable, but also I think the development push is too. We also need to develop as a country. All the countries which are talking about sustainability have done all the damage centuries back. So how do you kind of balance that out?
No, just transition is a major issue. I think balancing development with sustainability is obviously because you don't want our people to not develop. I think improving the GDP per capita is important, and improving their quality of lives is important actually, and that cannot be compromised. And India therefore has taken in its Glasgow summit a slightly longer net zero kind of targets actually. But India is also facing challenges actually. Like for instance, if you look at the 2047 goals that India has got in terms of growth rates, and we talk of big numbers, 10 trillion economy and all of that, I think there's a lot of assumption about climate neutrality at this point of time. In fact, there are estimates which now say that those climate neutrality is not realistic, and you should take off 25% of those goals in terms of achievability, which means India will never achieve. Secondly, there are real impacts. Look at the vagaries of monsoons now, agriculture being impacted.
The weather,
heat, structures of buildings, health issues. I think all of these are real coming. So there are social costs. I think sustainability is for a country is also about social costs actually, and therefore I think India has to willy-nilly fast track its sustainability initiatives. And India is doing a good job in certain areas, like solar power is an example. India is doing a good job in terms of doing it. But rest of it, I think, is still some way to go. That's why I think I'm a big believer in the role of innovation, actually. Where I think what startup world is doing. There's a company called Iki Foods as an example, where I'm an investor, and they do these closed, climate-controlled, water-based, hydroponic kind of cultivation, and great results actually. So I think India needs to do a lot more. And the reality also is that monies will have to come from governments. I think there's mitigation and there's adaptation. Mitigation has to come from the government actually, because it's beyond corporations thing. And eventually I think people will pay. People will end up paying for the cost of this. Carbon tax as an example. I think it's only a matter of time when individuals will have to pay carbon tax. Forget GST, forget income tax, there'll be a carbon tax. Maybe it's a carve out of something else actually. But balancing the just transition is going to be very critical. And there's a role for government, there's a role for society, there's a role for corporations. And we need a much more coordinated response. Like this urban planning that is happening today, Bombay is dug up everywhere actually. It may be great development, but at what cost? The pollution levels have gone up and health issues are coming.
Permanent haze over the city.
Exactly. I think these are real challenges actually. And I think just transition also means that we all need to be sensitive.
You spoke about this angel investing, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that you are an reasonably active angel investor. Now, the startup ecosystem has completely taken off for the last several years. and the attrition rates are fairly high. Right now, there are a number of large corporates, and they are not as agile, right? So they are trying to solve problems which are fundamental to this country in a lot of industries. And you have large corporates in those very sectors. Now, is there a role for some of these large corporates to actually work with the startups so that they don't die? A lot of them die because there's lack of funding, they don't have the mentoring, they don't have the right, people are young, right? So they die for different reasons. So is there a role that you see?
There is definitely actually. I think to get more agile, I think you should be happy to learn from anybody who's kind of working on the area that you seek. And therefore, I think gradually corporates are, getting involved. I think the growth of family offices now, because people are getting wealthy, and family offices are now become one of the biggest investors in the startup ecosystem today. Actually, I think so. Hence, I think, and if family offices get actively involved, I think some of those will go back to the companies that they come from. Actually, so there is a huge opportunity to use the startup ecosystem to kind of work. But of course, it's a hit and a miss. Some will work, some will not work.
But do you have an example of anything done while you were with Tata's or any of the other groups where you've successfully co-opted or worked with a startup?
I think directly I can't think. No, I'll give an example. I think one of the things that we did at Indian Hotels was kind of trying to work with innovative startups. Actually, the problem we had was that how do you bear the cost of such innovative startups? Actually, so we worked with IFC Washington. IFC Washington has a program called Tech Emerge, where they set aside a portion of capital to curate a series of startups. And then they came to us saying that here are 9 pilots I think you can do. And they said we will bear the cost of those.
And these were all Indian startups?
Indian startups. They were all Indian startups. And they were willing to bear the cost of the pilot. So which means it took the decision making out of us. But it was easy then, somebody is doing it. And once those 9 pilots happened, then we started discussing with them saying that which pilots have been successful.
But they were trying to solve problems for IHCL.
Yes.
They were very specific.
They work across different sectors.
Right.
They work. It could. Some of the solutions could have worked in other areas also.
Okay.
But the point is that we picked 9 startups. We tested it out, and then we sat with them and said these 1 or 2 things have done well. So therefore, how do we scale it up actually? And I think so that is something that I think we did it at Indian Hotels. And I think if you look at the pharmacy world, for instance, as an example, now the entire research process is getting broken up actually, because otherwise research is a very expensive, long process. But now with contract research organizations coming up and all that, I think you can actually break up the processes. CDMO. CDMO is now very big now, and I think with CDMOs coming in, I think you can break it up, and big companies can benefit. They can make it cheaper, they can make it faster, and hence I think pharma companies do it. So I think there are sufficient examples of these things happening very clearly. Right?
And you see that's the way forward, right? For
I
these
think
two
so.
Ecosystems to kind of work a little bit more closely
together.
Because there is agility there is hunger, enthusiasm, energy, right? And you combine that with the experience and the capital and whatnot, access.
Absolutely. And I think there's also a transitory phase, I think, because that comes from a position that traditional organizations are not agile. But if you go back to what we initially discussed, saying that we are becoming a bit of a hustle culture, and that is now permeating everywhere actually. Even if you're a Tata Group or if you're any other group, I think you want to get things done faster actually. And with agility coming in, my own sense is that companies are also kind of getting better. Youngsters, I think the old guard is gone, the newer people are coming in. So hence I think the opportunity to work across different ecosystems, and from a capital perspective, I think you can always allocate capital actually, and say that let me allocate capital, risk capital to some areas where I don't mind losing. This whole blended finance, I mean whether IFC Washington does it or whether we do it, I think this whole blended finance where you're willing to take risks with startups and willing to lose monies in the hope that something will work.
Like what you said, right? That the 250,000 example that you gave. You're taking a bet. If it works, good. I mean, if it
doesn't work,
it's fine.
It's fine. Yeah, it's fine. And how do you see that actually? You work across multiple companies.
So you mean the investment bit?
Investment, or even how do large companies work? And
see, I think a number of these large companies have incubated startups or they have taken on startups. Like if you look at Mahindra, First Cry, for example, it was an independent company or a startup, right? And they kind of took it over. So there are various examples now of Reliance, for instance. I think they ran an incubation program called Reliance Geo Next, Gen Next, and they used to have companies in the Dhirubhai Ambani Knowledge Center for several months. And then they used to have a pitch day where they went and pitched. But ultimately, I think the companies that actually were really innovative and they won, they would try and find a way of integrating them back into one of the Reliance companies as part of the group, right? So I think they tried doing something like that. But I increasingly see this kind of happening, or you see some of the smaller ones being absorbed by the larger startups. Because let's say now Flipkart is a Flipkart because of whatever they have done over a 15-16 year period, but they also now have the ability, they have got the leadership gravitas, bandwidth, the capital, whatever, right, and the backing to be able to absorb a lot of the other smaller ones. So it gives smaller entrepreneurs also the some kind of a hope that, if I build something really good, innovative, which can be scaled up, which can solve a real problem, then I also have an opportunity of an exit. Because otherwise, there's no monetization opportunity, right, for some of these guys. You're all building companies, but there is no monetization opportunity, right? So I see a lot of that kind of happening, not just with large corporates working with the startups, but startups working with other startups and trying to take them, work with them closely or take them on.
But one concern I do have with startups in India or general is the whole governance thing, actually. And that is a big concern. I think I myself see. In fact, today I no longer invest individual angel investments. I actually become an LP now because that gives me greater protection. Because sometimes you don't get basic things like information rights, actually, and that is now becoming a big concern. And I think these companies are also not like, there was this recent, I won't mention the name of the company, where the market cap fell 40%. This Bangalore-based company because they couldn't communicate to that rate. And how do you kind of mature to a level where, and in fact, one of the areas that I'm seriously interested in is, how do you help these companies to do the mind shift change, especially as they go IPO as an example. I think, it's a different world. When you're your own closely held company, you're in a different mindset. When you go listing, you're a completely different mindset, actually. I think the governance, the maturity movement is still not happened, I feel, actually.
No, it's actually, one part is the governance. I mean, very well said, Giri. The other part is also the economic model. Because I think that a lot has shifted now. People are talking about profits and cash flows is still some distance away. But people are talking about profits. I don't think it's still ingrained. Because today I think startups have the ability to list even if they are not profitable. Right. So in a sense, I think the market, once you list on the main board in the NSE or in the BSE, the biggest criteria is the market is going to judge by the profits that you're going to generate. It's no longer about those vanity revenue numbers or eyeballs and things like that, which your investors used to do, because you need those kind of investors to back you till you get to that scale and size. But once you're in the market, I think you'll be evaluated against any other company out there. Then you can't say I'm a tech startup, my metrics are very different. No, then I think you have made a conscious choice that you're listing out here, which is why you're seeing. So one is the governance, the other bit is the economic model. So if the economic model does not match up to the hype and the brand that has been built, then your valuations kind of plummet. And they plummet more for some of these guys as compared to, say, a Tata Group, because I think there are processes in place. There is trust, there is integrity, there is a certain reputation that has been built over a period of time, and results don't yo-yo as much.
No. In fact, I was talking to one of the fund managers who holds a significant stake in this particular company where the market crashed, and he said, "Giri, Tata Group mein to 40% nahi drop hota hai kabhi."
Exactly.
I think whereas this company dropped 40% overnight, actually. So this is a real issue.
It's an issue.
Which means I think one of the things which I think private equity companies are also now realizing is that I think you need leadership mentoring in these places, actually. I think beyond building a product and focusing on product market fit and trying to drive revenue, You need a certain maturity. Actually.
You're right. Also, I think, maybe I will call myself also a little old school. And if you read all the books written by some of the greatest investors, okay, I think there is no piece of literature that tells you that a company can be built or scaled up in 5 years.
Correct.
I think there is a certain, when you talk about the hustle mindset, that's another thing that I see. Yeah. Everyone wants to become a unicorn or a sizable company in the shortest possible time, and that means that and how many companies can actually make it. So it's okay for those unicorns to hustle and become this, but for the 99% of the companies out there, you cannot simply go and replicate, because great companies have taken time to kind of build, right? It's taken them many decades. It's not even 5 years or 10 years. So I think building a company is a bloody tough job. So as long as that is not ingrained and everyone doesn't accept that reality, I think it's always going to be a tough journey, right? You'll have more bloodbaths. You'll probably, some people may list and then they'll figure out that what they thought was the valuation of the company when they listed or pre-listing is not what it is in 6 months' time after they list. So
I think at least to that extent, I think I'm always a believer that some of those old-fashioned values of growth, profitability, cash flows,
absolutely,
are all very, very
relevant. You still value companies on free cash flows. You don't unless you are in this startup world. I don't know how it gets valued now, but clearly once you are a publicly listed company, there is no other metric to value the company. They look at your cash flows, right? They look at your future. They look at revenues for sure, but they look at what is the visibility, the quality of earnings, and things like that, right? Yeah. So on that note, we are pretty much coming to the end. I hate to say that we're going to end this, because I thought it is very seamless the way this conversation went. I'm going to ask you a few, as they call it, rapid fire questions, right? Are you ready? For this? Sure. Okay. Best book you've read recently?
I think now I would say Bhagavad Gita.
Okay. You call that as a book?
I think so. I think I'm reading it. I think I think somebody said, where do you read books actually? I think
when do you read or where do you read?
Why do you read?
Why do you read? Okay.
I think reading is for transformation, not necessarily for information actually. If you apply that lens, if you kind of believe that reading is for transformation, I think Bhagavad Gita kind of makes you think actually.
One word that describes your leadership style.
I think I can be a bit understated actually.
You are.
Yeah. So I think
you are. For the personality that you are, I think you are understated. Yeah. If you weren't a finance and a business leader, what would you be doing?
I think if I had not done my MBA, which was more an accident. We just wrote CAT and got into Ahmedabad, and people said you would be an idiot not to take up Ahmedabad. I would have probably been a chartered accountant in practice in Chennai actually.
Really?
I think, exactly.
Really?
I was all set to join my uncle in practice.
And a startup you're most excited about right now?
I think at this point of time, I've joined a board of a company called Amagi. I think I'm really excited about that company, because I think what I really like about that company is that it's an India for the world kind of. They're building technology. They're global leaders.
What's your go-to productivity hack?
I think no particular productivity hack actually. I think I'm a person when I get into meetings, as an example. I think I'm a person who believes in putting all thoughts on the table. So the way I typically work, and that is always the best way of working, is that if we are sitting around a table, I think I like to have open discussions, which means all our thoughts are on the table and we agree on something to be done. And it's very efficient also.
A country you have loved working in the most?
I think in place to live, I think London was clearly very good. I think really nice actually.
Most influential mentor in your career?
I think he would not recognize, he'd probably be surprised, but I think in the last 7 years, Chandra has been a mentor actually. Not in the mentor way in terms of my approaching him for a problem, but in all the engagements, in all the interactions. And we have gone through this massive transformation at Indian Hotels actually.
Favorite way to unwind?
Music.
After a hectic
Music.
So if you were a 20-year-old today, what is that one piece of advice you would
Probably give? More risk taking. I think because I've been a large organization then. So I think, while I've learned a little bit about startups through my investing days, I think I've never really worked in a startup. So I don't know what a hustle mindset means.
of when it comes to guilty pleasure food?
Food, no, actually I've been pretty disciplined actually.
Yeah.
I don't have, I mean...
No sugar?
No. Generally I'm pretty careful.
Yeah.
Careful, and I think a bit of honey in the morning, dates and things like that.
That is all. That won't count. If you could swap jobs with any leader for a day, who would it be?
I think two people. I think I had a fantastic boss at Merck, Caroline Litchfield. She's now the global CFO. Amazing lady in terms of...
What was her name?
Caroline Litchfield. Terrific lady actually. I think all her life in Merck and very, very empathetic, very precise, great communicator and operating from the heart. I think I always respected her, and even now I kind of keep in touch with her once in a while. I think I'll certainly sometimes get into shoes. And the other thing, of course, will be too big for me to say, but if I get swapped for a day with Chandra, is what I would say actually. But I think these two people at least have been big influences in the last 10 years, is what I would say.
Right.
Yeah.
So on that note, is there anything that you would like to share as a final word to a lot of the listeners, Giri, before we bring this episode to a conclusion?
No, I think first of all, thank you for having me. I think what you're doing in terms of getting different people is fascinating, because I think it allows people to listen to different perspectives. And secondly, what you have been building, and you have been an entrepreneur for nearly about 17 years. It's not easy to build an organization, so you've obviously done that. I think the only word I would say is that the world is now becoming a world of opportunity actually, and I spoke about the fact that I think it's important to take risks actually, but behind all of this, to take advantage of the opportunity and to be able to take risks, I think we need the breadth now actually. I think I would only encourage youngsters to develop breadth actually. I think our education system unfortunately is not providing that liberal breadth, and so hence I think try out different things, build the breadth, because I think today, I as I said, I had a career across different companies. Not that I planned actually, but today I'm so glad that it was multi-industry, multi-geography actually.
And multi-roles also. You did business development, you
Exactly.
were the CEO, you were the CFO. Yeah.
Exactly. So the net result is, it all comes down to it. So breadth is something that I'm seriously evangelizing actually. And one book that I'll recommend people to read is a book called Range by David Epstein. David Epstein has done a fantastic job in terms, and India needs that liberal education. And Ashoka, Kriya, some are coming up, but still far away to be honest. And I think and try out different things. Younger age, you try out, like my son doing music, it's fine.
Yeah.
I think if you have to take risks, you have to take risks in your initial part of the
mistakes or whatever, learn. Exactly. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Giri, for your time, and it was a pleasure, absolute pleasure and an honor to do this podcast with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.